Hey everybody, Beth Helvey with Couture Real Estate. It is Friday, September 18th. We're already halfway through September. I hope y'all are doing well today. So, you are getting ready to close on your house. Whether you are a seller or a buyer, the week or two before a closing can sometimes feel like you're being thrown. There's a lot that goes on, a lot that you have to do, especially when you look at the previous 2 or 3 weeks, which may have been pretty quiet. Whether you're getting a loan or paying cash, the middle part does tend to be kind of quiet for pretty much everybody. Hi, Yomaz. So here's what happens. If you're a buyer, one of the things you're going to do the week of closing is you're going to make sure that your electric is connected. You want to make sure that your electric is connected for the day of your closing. Especially here in Florida, you do not want to be without an AC because it gets hot and it gets muggy and it gets nasty. And if you're moving in, you don't want to move under those conditions. Your water is different. The way we do water here is probably different than the rest of the country. With the water, you will call the utility company and say, I'm moving in, here's my date of closing, all that good stuff. They will not actually set up an account for you until they have your closing statement. You can upload that the day of closing. Sometimes even your closing agent will do it for you if they have time. And then they will start your account. You'll have water. Even if your seller calls and says, hey, I'm selling the house, I'm out on this day, they will not cut off the water. But they won't change the account over until they get that closing statement. They will prorate it appropriately. So your seller will pay until the day before closing. You will start paying the day of closing, but you do need to upload that information. They will not switch it without. And that's just one of the strange things in our area. Cable. I would probably call your cable company a good 2 weeks out. Cable companies are so behind right now. Don't forget, we started school 3 weeks ago here in Sarasota County. And there are kids who are opting to stay home. And I can guarantee you that even though we did homeschool last year, there are probably parents who need to update their cable systems, update their wireless and things like that. Our cable people are extremely busy. I would go ahead and schedule that 2 weeks out, especially if you work from home and you need that cable connection. Otherwise, you're using your hotspot. So you want to make sure that you have your wire information, whether you're paying by cash or whether you are paying by loan and you have your cash to close. You will need the place it is going to get wired to ahead of time. Most banks can send your wire information or your wired funds 24 hours out. Sometimes they do want 48 just to make sure it's there. I would schedule your wire to arrive the day before if you can. Now, if we're getting close and we're not quite sure, we're still working out a few of the figures, ask your closing agent what the high number is, send that high number, and they'll cut you a check for the difference at the closing table. If we're under that situation, don't necessarily wait for that final amount, because if your wire is there late, you don't get keys. You have to have your money there and your lender's money at the closing table or sometime on the closing day in order to actually get the keys to your new house. What else? We're going to do the walkthrough. Here's what I strongly suggest. I strongly suggest that you do the walkthrough no sooner than the day before. This is why. If you are closing on a Wednesday and you do your walkthrough the Friday before, a lot can happen in those 4 days. What if a pipe bursts? What if the seller hasn't moved out? Do you really want to do a walkthrough before they move out? What if something happens in the community that requires it? What if we get a storm? You really want to do that. And here's another little tidbit for you. If you are actually buying from out of state legally, I can't do the walkthrough for you. I can go and I can do a video with you. I'm still going to have you sign a piece of paper that says you didn't do a walkthrough. And I'm doing that to protect myself. That is not a walkthrough. Something I do suggest is if you are buying a property and we asked for several repairs, which happens, we do know this, and you want to make sure those repairs were done. And it's more than just, is that light now working? Because it probably had a burnt out bulb or something being replaced that's obvious. Then you can hire the inspector to go back a day or two before and do a re-inspection. What they'll do is they will re-inspect just those areas that we've requested a repair on. And it usually costs from anywhere from $50 to $100. You need to book that ahead of time, just like you do your inspection, because they're still working you in as a regular inspection. But that's a really, really good idea to do. It's much, much better to spend $75 and know that the plumbing, the electrical, the garage door, the AC, whatever it is that needed to be repaired was actually done correctly, then fumble through and find out. Because let's face it, if we go in there and we turn on the AC and it turns on, but when you move in the next day, it doesn't because whatever needed to be fixed didn't get fixed, at that point, you're stuck. So that's really a good thing to do. Again, you want to try to be there for the inspection if you can. It's best to do it the day before or the day of, particularly if your seller is still living in the property. You want to do it after they've moved out, because you want to make sure, and you want to make sure they get all their stuff out for one. You want to make sure the place is clean. In our contract, it says swept clean, which is not clean in most people's standards. Most sellers, however, will clean the house. But you want to make sure it's at the very least swept clean. They got all their stuff out of the fridge. Because trust me, it's a crazy time. And there are sellers who go, oh my gosh, I didn't clean out the refrigerator. It happens. You want to make sure there was no damage left behind because they moved out. I did a closing early on in my career where they were trying to bring the couch down from the loft and ended up putting holes in the stairwell to the loft and thought that they could get away without repairing it. And we went, no, you put those holes there, you have to fix that and you have to repaint it before we move in. So things like that. Again, 98% of the time, the walkthrough is fine. But once in a great while, it's not. And that is things that you need to do ahead of time. Buyers or sellers, I'm sorry, if you have done those repairs, then the week of closing, you need to gather your invoices and receipts and give them to your realtor so they can pass them along. There's a lot of good reasons to do that. One is you are showing proof that you actually had this item repaired. The other thing is too, is if your buyer has a question or if maybe it wasn't done correctly or they need to do further repairs or they want to do further work, they now have the vendors who did it and they can call XYZ vendor and said, hey, I know you came and worked out on the garage door. I'd like you to come back and do something else to it. And that's just a little something that you can do that is actually helpful for you and for the buyers. And I recommend that sellers gather all their receipts and invoices and we submit them. Same thing with you. You're going to have the power and the electric and all that turned off. Technically speaking, you can do it the day before closing. I advise people to do it the day of closing. It's a minimal amount on your bill. It's only going to be a few dollars, but we can doubly ensure that there will be no hiccups in service. Usually there isn't, hi Sue, but let's just be on the safe side and make sure there isn't. So close everything off the day of closing. And in that way, you can be sure that when your buyers move in, then they are not going to have any issues with the electric. If they don't get it connected at the day of closing, that's their problem. You've done what you're supposed to do. Bring both buyers and sellers, bring your driver's licenses to closing when you sign. You both have to prove that you are who you say you are. Bring your driver's licenses. You want to do... make sure that your closing agent has your wire information. Your proceeds for the sale of your property are going to get wired to your account, whatever account, checking account, savings account, IRAs. If you're going to send it to your financial advisor, however you're going to do that, you want to make sure that that is set up ahead of time. Your closing agent is happy to send the money wherever it needs to go. Okay, but you need to give them that information up front and so that they have their files. At closing, what they're going to do is they're going to slide that paper to you and say, I need you to verify this account information here. Sometimes they'll even have you initial or sign it just to make sure, because we experience so much wire fraud, that the money is actually going where it's supposed to go. Because once it leaves, it's really hard to get it back if it goes to the wrong place. Okay. Buyers, when you show up, bring your checkbook just in case. Not very often, but once in a blue moon, there's something that hasn't been accounted for and you may need to write a check. You'll know about it ahead of time, but if it's something that can be done outside of closing and we don't have to change the closing statement and then start that 3-day tick all over again, we will do that. Of course, if it's legally we can do that, we will. So just put it in your pocketbook or your pocket or whatever, just to be on the safe side. It's better to have it than to not have it. Sometimes the things we might forget about is you promise to pay the seller, $500 for their living room set, bring the check, write the check out, then give to the closing agent. They'll take care of it. By sellers, you really should be moved out the day before closing. If you try to move out the day of closing, I can guarantee you that Murphy's Law is going to kick in and it will go wrong. Your buyer is going to want to do the walkthrough with the house empty. They have the right to do so, which is why we often do walkthroughs an hour or two before our appointment to close on the property at the attorney's office or the title company, wherever we end up going. You need to be moved out. I had a closing early on in my career here in Florida where we got there and the heirs, which was the son of the deceased seller, hadn't moved any of the furniture out. So we called and he said, well, yeah, I'm just going to put it on the curb. My buyers went, no, we are not going to be responsible for you disposing of all this furniture. We held up closing for 2 days. We were able to. So sellers, if you haven't properly moved out, if you haven't done all your repairs, if you're still scrambling to get everything out the day of closing, if your truck is still in the driveway, if you haven't cleaned or any of that stuff yet, if your buyer is able to delay closing, they will. And it could create a lot of problems for you, especially if you need that money to close on something else. Yes, that may mean you've got to stay with friends or family or even get a hotel room for that night, but trust me, it's worth not having to scramble at the last minute if you can possibly get out the day before closing. Everything goes significantly more smoothly in that way. Buyers, if you're going to schedule a moving truck, cleaners, painters, vendors, don't do it the day of closing for the same reason I'm telling the sellers to make sure they move out before closing. What if closing gets delayed? What if there is a storm? What if? If your sellers, hi Terry, if your sellers are moving out and we have to, the day of closing because they didn't listen to their realtor or their realtor didn't tell them, and we have to delay closing, where's your truck gonna live? So if you are closing on a Thursday, move-in day should be Friday or Monday. And I know that's a pain. And I know, again, for you, that means, you know, you may have to find a place to stay for a couple of days, but it's always better to be safe than spend that last couple of days, which should be really happy and joyous, scrambling and freaking out. If you at all can possibly do it, or even schedule your truck to come later that night, it's entirely up to you. But I suggest this to all of my buyers. Try not to move in the day of closing because it will create headaches if there is a delay in your closing. If you're hoping that you're going to close at 9 o'clock in the morning, 3 weeks before we scheduled it, and you've already scheduled a mover, we may have a problem. So just be really careful. So those are things that you need to be aware of. There's a lot of moving parts. When we get a couple weeks out, of course, I'll remind you of all of this stuff and how you should schedule stuff and when you should turn things off and turn things on and all of that. But the scheduling is tricky. In this day of interest rates being less than 3%, the chances of you closing on a property that you're selling and closing on a property that you're buying on the same day isn't always possible. There are too many moving parts going on here. There's too many, people with their fingers in this. You've got possibly 3 or 4 sets of realtors, you have a couple sets of lenders, a couple sets of closing agents, and you've got all kinds of moving parts going on right now. And let me tell you something, the lending world and the closing world are pulling out the hair going crazy right now. We have never seen rates this low, and it is creating delays because people who were originally going to buy with cash are now getting a loan. People who were waiting to buy are now buying because they want to take advantage of these rates. And people who already have a mortgage are refinancing in order to save sometimes several $100s a month or get ahead on their mortgage payments. So give your lender some love, give your closing agent some love. They're working crazy hours trying to keep everybody on track, and do them a favor and don't overload them by trying to schedule a closing on a sale and a closing on a purchase on the same day, and give yourself a break with your schedule. Give yourself a couple days because you're probably going to need it. Because if we're all this busy, then your ancillary people are also busy. Your movers, your cleaning people, your vendors, they're all scheduling 2 and 3 weeks out. So just be careful and be mindful of all of this, because if you cancel people, they're not going to be back for 2 or 3 weeks. Okay. This is just what I see that's going on right now. It's a crazy world right now with interest rates being below 3%. This is historical. You're going to be bragging about this in a few years when your friends go to buy a property and they're paying 5 or 6%. So I hope you all have a great day. It is raining right now. I didn't even know it was going to rain, but I don't pay attention to the weather forecast. I am that person. If you have the opportunity and it stops raining, I encourage you to get outside and get some vitamin D, wear lots of sunscreen, drink lots of water. If you have any questions on this, throw it in the comments or send me a DM and I'm happy to answer them. And if you have any questions on real estate in general, throw it in the comments or send me a DM. I love hearing what y'all have to ask. Have a great day, everybody. Bye now.